People like to imagine that setting sail is a beginning, an adventure, a bold step into the unknown. But in Moby-Dick, the departure is not a beginning. It is a voluntary descent into a deep well. The land represents order, identity, names, the roles society assigns you. The moment you step onto the deck, you leave all of that behind. The sea recognizes no father, no social class, no resume, no dignity. The sea acknowledges only one kind of person, the one who can admit they are hollow. This is why so many men insist on going to sea, not because they are drawn toward freedom, but because they cannot bear the performance of having meaning on shore. On land, everyone is acting. I know what I'm doing. I have purpose. I am progressing. I am becoming a better version of myself. But when you stare at the ceiling at night, you have no idea where you're going. You are simply afraid to stop. The sea's cruelty lies in the fact that it says this out loud. Setting sail is not pursuit. It is escape. Escape from the echo chamber of the self. Escape from the fragile costumes of civilization. Escape from the pressure to become someone. Ironically, everyone on board claims to have a noble reason. The sailor says it's for wages. The whaleman calls it duty. The merchant calls it profit. Ahab calls it destiny. These are not reasons. They are disguises. The true reason is always the same. We do not know how to live with ourselves. So we need the sea, the one place where the void inside us grows large enough to be undeniable. And the moment of departure is the apex of human self-deception. As the ship pulls away from shore, each man performs determination and direction. But only the sea knows. They are simply drifting with their fear. Queequeg carries his silent self-sufficiency. Ishmael carries his desire to no longer perform a role in someone else's life. The other sailors carry a shapeless confusion about how to live. And Ahab carries the terror that if he does not pursue the whale, he will no longer know who he is. He is not chasing the whale. He is chasing a reason to believe he isn't empty. This is the real cruelty of Moby-Dick's departure. Everyone is searching for an illusion sturdy enough to hold their existence together. Some call it faith. Some call it duty. Some call it passion. Some call it love. Ahab calls it vengeance. Most call it nothing at all because they don't have the language for it. This is not romance. This is exhaustion, not pursuit, surrender. On land, they can still pretend to belong. At sea, they are forced to face, I have nothing solid inside me. I have been narrating my life instead of living it. So, departure is not a beginning. It is the admission that one no longer knows how to return to oneself. The whale has not appeared. The sea is still calm. Fate has not yet bared its teeth. But the tragedy is already complete, because every man on that ship believes they are going to hunt a whale. What they do not understand is this: the voyage is hunting them. Chapter 11. This passage is profoundly significant within Moby-Dick. It marks Ishmael's transition from the fear of the other to an awakening of universal humanity. Through it, Queequeg ceases to be a foreign savage and becomes instead a fellow being made in the image of God. Reading from the original. The man's a human being just as I am. He has just as much reason to fear me as I have to be afraid of him. Why should I be afraid of him? The truth is, we are all somehow dreadfully cracked about the head and sadly need mending. There he lay, a comely figure, sleeping soundly and peacefully. I looked at him with a sort of affectionate interest. He seemed a creature made in the image of God, yea, the very same image. The great difference being that though all men be made in one likeness, yet they do not all look alike. And that old image of the Almighty which we see in our fellow men is often like the worn-out print of a picture in a book, now blurred and defaced, with here and there a feature remaining, but beyond all recognition. Still, God's image remains, though the Almighty's features may be worn away. So I lay at last, half sleeping, half waking, while the half-light of dawn came slowly in through the window, and I felt the old world beginning to stir once more. I opened my eyes, and the snow was driving fast. Chapter 12. Exile Awakens the Soul. Reading from the original. Queequeg was a native of Rokovoko, an island far away to the west and south. It is not down in any map. True places never are. When a new-hatched savage running wild about his native woodlands in a grass clout, followed by the nibbling goats, as if he were a green sapling. Even then, in Queequeg's ambitious soul lurked a strong desire to see something more of Christendom than a specimen whaler or two. His father was a high chief, a king, his uncle a high priest, and on the maternal side he boasted aunts who were the wives of unconquerable warriors. There was excellent blood in his veins, royal stuff, though sadly vitiated, I fear, by the cannibal propensity he nourished in his untutored youth. A Sag Harbor ship visited his father's bay, and Queequeg sought a passage to Christian lands. But the ship, having completed her cargo, departed without him. He was disheartened for a time, but the thought of living and dying on a small island like his father's, and of sleeping in the same grave with kings of his race, and never having pushed his adventurous spirit beyond the surf, made him impatient of all restraint. Chapter 13. Action reveals character. Kindness transcends words. Reading from the original. We proceeded to embark. It was quite late in the day before we arrived at Nantucket. So, after discharging our luggage, we found a lodging there for the night. The next morning after breakfast, we proceeded down to the wharf to see about the whaling ships, and Queequeg, seeing a large one with 3 masts, inquired what ship it was. "The Pequod," was the answer. "She's just ready for sea." "What kind of ship is she?" said I. "Oh, she's a famous old ship. Some say she's a little out of date, but she's got a noble reputation. Old Captain Peleg, who owns a good share in her, used to be her commander, but now he's retired, and they say he and Captain Bildad, his partner, have put Ahab in command." "Ahab," said I. "Who's Ahab?" "Ahab? Well, Ahab's been in colleges as well as among the cannibals, but he's a grand, ungodly, godlike man. Captain Ahab doesn't speak much, but when he does speak, you may well listen. Mark me. Be sure of this. Ahab has his humanities." Chapter 14. Isolation begets freedom. The shoreless know the world. Reading from the original nothing, more happened on the passage worthy the mentioning, so after a fine run, we safely arrived in Nantucket. Nantucket. Take out your map and look at it. See what a real corner of the world it occupies, how it stands there away offshore, more lonely than the Eddystone Lighthouse. Look at it, a mere hillock and elbow of sand, all beach without a background. There is more sand there than you would use in 20 years as a substitute for blotting paper. It is an island and a very sandy one. But then it was the great whaling island, the headquarters of the whaling interest. Once more, take your map and look at the spot where Nantucket is said to be. See how it stands there quite alone, the most isolated portion of the globe. There flits the Nantucketer. He alone resides and riots on the sea. He alone, in Bible language, goes down to it in ships, to and fro plowing it as his own special plantation. There is his home, there lies his business, which a Noah's flood would not interrupt, though it overwhelmed all the millions in China. He lives on the sea, as prairie cocks in the prairie. He hides among the waves, he climbs them as chamois hunters climb the Alps. For years he knows not the land, so that when he comes to it at last, it smells like another world, more strangely than the moon would to an earthsman. With the landless gull that at sunset folds her wings and is rocked to sleep between billows, so at nightfall the Nantucketer, out of sight of land, furls his sails and lays him to his rest, while under his very pillow rush herds of walruses and whales. Chapter 15. Nourishment is belonging. Divinity dwells in the ordinary. Reading from the original. It was quite late in the evening when the little packet sailed into the harbor of Nantucket, and still later, ere we landed, and found ourselves in a narrow street, full of the smell of fish and oil, with oil shops and shops for the sale of whalemen's outfits. We picked our way among the scattering fish barrels, past the whaleman's chapel, and went down a small side street towards the water, and inquiring for an inn, were recommended to the Try-Pots, kept by Mrs. Hussey. Upon making known our desire for supper and a bed, Mrs. Hussey, bustling about, said she could give us a couple of clam or cod chowders, a rare hot supper, and that she had plenty of beds. "Clam or cod?" said I quickly. "A clam for supper?" Queequeg said. "Aye, clam," said I. "You may have clam for supper, but not for breakfast," said Mrs. Hussey, "so you better take cod." They both looked at me, but I said I would have clam, so clam it was. We soon sat down before a big wooden bowl of steaming chowder, a warm, savory, unctuous thing. When I tasted it, I realized for the first time what a noble thing is that chowder, what a delicious dish for a winter's night. Still, Mrs. Hussey kept darting in and out of the room, and every now and then popping her head in to see how we got on. She seemed to take a sort of motherly interest in us, as if we were a couple of lost children. The chowder being swallowed, we picked our teeth with great satisfaction, and then retired to our room for the night. Chapter 16. The Ship of Fate Sails on Choice and Trust. Reading from the original. Then I came across the Pequod. It was a ship of a noble yet weather-beaten aspect. Her old hull seemed to have known storms and years, but there was a kind of grim, rustic dignity about her that reminded me of a veteran warrior scarred in 100 battles, and bearing still the marks of his glory. Her masts stood stiff and tall. Her spars looked well seasoned. Her whole frame bore the traces of hard service, yet sound as a bell. There were dark streaks along her sides, not from decay, but from tar and time. She was old, but strong, solemn, but not sad. On her quarter-deck I observed a curious set of wooden devices and old whalebone embellishments, carved shapes of spears, bows, and fish, and her tiller was inlaid with scrimshaw. She looked like an ark built by some ancient shipwright philosopher, the last relic of a forgotten race of men. Chapter 17. In silence dwells power, fate gazes from the deep. Reading from the original. I say, we good Presbyterian Christians should be charitable in these things, and not fancy ourselves so vastly superior to other mortals, pagans and what not, because of their half-crazy conceits on these subjects. There was Queequeg now, certainly entertaining the most absurd notions about Yojo and his Ramadan. But what of that? Queequeg thought he knew why he did it, I suppose. We Presbyterians had no clear idea why we fasted on particular days either, and we kept it up nevertheless. Queequeg's Ramadan only made him a little stiff and sore, but he was none the worse for it. Rather, he seemed all the better afterwards. So soon as I hinted that he must be hungry, he sprang up and said that he would go to breakfast with me. So off we went, and after some mutual explanation, he told me that in his country fasting was not only for piety's sake, but also as a means of bodily strength and spiritual cleansing. Chapter 18. Trust is the soul's covenant, signed in the wind. Reading from the original, Queequeg now wanted to record the fact that he and I were mates and partners in a whaling voyage. But this was a little puzzling, because my arm was too long for him to measure, and he could not well reach round me to make his usual mark upon himself. However, he soon hit upon the right idea. He took a piece of paper and bade me write upon it my name, or sign, as he called it, and then he made his mark upon it too. Now, said he, we are both signed together. This paper says it. Aye, said I, it does, and may our voyage be a lucky one. Amen, said Queequeg, with his queer cannibal grace. Then I remembered that he had previously been studying signs and symbols of all sorts in his own wild way. He had been copying them with great care, sometimes turning them upside down, and sometimes wrong end first. In this matter, he seemed rather to imitate the spirit of the letters than the form, as if he had divined their meaning through some mystic sympathy rather than from the mere lines upon the paper. So now, Ishmael, said Queequeg, you see me, and I see you. We are man and man, and now that we have signed the paper together, let us go and see the ship we are to sail in. Chapter 19. Faith is refined by doubt. Truth shines through trial. Reading from the original Shipmates. Have ye shipped in that ship? Queequeg and I had just left the Pequod, and were sauntering away from the water, when a strange sort of old man stopped us. Ye've shipped, have ye? Names down on the papers? Well, well, what's signed is signed, and what's to be will be, and then again, perhaps it won't be after all. Anyhow, it's all fixed and arranged already, and some sailors or other must go with him, I suppose. He peered into our eyes. Yes, all fixed and arranged already. What's the matter with the old man? Said I to Queequeg. Who's to be? Said I again. Ahab, Captain Ahab. What? The ship's captain? Captain Ahab? Aye, Ahab. There's his name, and I'm sorry for it. The mortal man's been cut away from his anchor, and now he drifts about on the open sea. He's a grand, ungodly, godlike man, Captain Ahab. Doesn't speak much, but when he does speak, you may well listen, said I. I know that. He was never drunk, but that's no sign of a good heart. He has his humanities. Humanities? I asked. I mean he has his humanities. And with that he paused, turned, and went his way, leaving us standing there, looking after him as he went, bending his head lowly as if listening to some invisible voice. "Queequeg," said I, "what in the world did that old man mean?" By his talk, it seemed as if he had known something of Captain Ahab. "Aye," said Queequeg, "you hear what he said. He say Ahab got humanities. That mean he ain't no god. That mean he a man. Maybe he crazy, said I. Maybe not. But I tell you what, Ishmael, me think that man look very strange. Aye, Queequeg, and it's not always that man's madness that we see, but our own reflected in them, said I. Maybe so, replied Queequeg, but old man's eyes, him shine like him look at something beyond this world. Aye, said I, perhaps he does. There are men who see too far and lose themselves between heaven and earth. Chapter 20. Action is a form of faith. Departure itself is the answer. Reading from the original. As I turned away, I saw the old prophet Elijah again standing at the corner, looking at me from under his tattered hat. He said nothing, but merely smiled and pointed towards the Pequod lying in the harbor. Then he turned and vanished among the crowd. Aye, said I to myself, what's to be, will be. The wind blows from fate's own lung, and we but hoist our sails to it. So that afternoon, Queequeg and I went down to the harbor again. The Pequod lay quiet, the tide lapping against her hull like a patient heartbeat. Men were loading barrels, coiling ropes, hammering, shouting. Every blow of a mallet, every cry of a workman was a pulse of purpose. There is a moment before any great voyage when even the smallest sound seems to tremble with destiny. I felt it then. The ropes creaked, the sails stirred faintly, as if the ship herself was breathing, ready to wake. Queequeg touched my shoulder. "Ishmael," he said softly, "Yojo say, go quick, sea wait long enough." I smiled and nodded. "Then let's go," I said. "The world is all astir.